Welcome to Nearpod Lesson 5.5, Naming Transitional Ionic Molecules. So as always, don't forget to title your notes this, and by the end of the video, these are the 3 things you need to know. Definitely write them in your notes so you know what you're looking for when you're taking a quiz or a test. Okay, so what are transition metals? Basically, they are these elements here with a yellow background, and they are elements that can have 2 or more charges. So for example, if you've ever looked at rust, you might have noticed that sometimes rust is a yellowish brownish color, and other times it has a very deep reddish color to it. And that's because iron, which is a transition metal, sometimes has a charge of 2 plus or sometimes 3 plus. So if you see that reddish rust color, you're looking at iron with a 3 plus charge. If you're looking at rust that has a yellowish brownish color, you're looking at iron with a 2 plus charge, right? And because these ions or these transition metals can have multiple charges when they form molecules, it can be a little bit trickier, and that's why we've kind of saved it till the end a little bit. As always, make sure you have these definitions in red. So on this slide, we're going to try to figure out how to find the molecular formula given the name of a transition metal. All right, so here we have the name of a transition metal, and we want to find what the formula is. And you might notice that different from before, I have Roman numerals now, right? So here it's almost the same steps, just a little bit of extra detailing, right? Okay. So something that we should know about the Roman numerals is that the Roman numerals help us identify the charge of the transition metal, right? So anytime I see a Roman numeral, it's referring to the elements before it's, and this Roman numeral is the charge. So this is the Roman numeral 2, so I know it has a charge of 2. If you don't know your Roman numerals, I've listed the 4 that you need to know. These are the only ones you need to know, and I would add this green box underneath your step number 1. And you might wonder, okay, so I know the charge is 2, but is it 2 plus or 2 minus? Well, remember that the first ion is always a positive charge, right? So the positively charged cation, our positive ion, always goes first. So 2 plus is going to be the charge, not 2 minus, because chromium is the first part of the name, so it has to be positive. Positive charge cation always goes first, right? Okay, so the next thing I need to do is figure out what the element symbol of chromium is. And remember from the previous slide that our transition metals are just in this section here. So what I can do is double check my periodic table, and if I click on it, I'm just going to look up this section in the middle right here for chromium. So as I scan across, see chromium here, the symbol is Cr. Right, so chromium is going to be Cr. The charge of 2 plus because of the Roman numeral 2. Right, so now I need to find the charge of this next element. So this element is called fluoride, but remember that we changed the ending of the name of this element, ide, to show that chromium and this other elements that I've underlined in blue are a couple. So ide, this part, you won't really find in the periodic table. So really you're looking for the part fluorine is what it used to be. right? Or sometimes it's like or something like that, right? But usually it ends in "ine," right? So we're going to go with that. Or you can just focus on the first part of the name, fluor. So I'm going to look for an element called fluor on my periodic table. Right? So if I scan across, going up top to bottom, I see fluorine, and that has a charge of 1 minus. So my element symbol for this is going to be F1 minus. So now I've completed step number 1. I've used the periodic table to identify the charge of this ion, fluorine, and I've used the Roman numeral to identify the charge of this transitional metal. So on to step 2. So I'm going to rewrite the 2 element symbols and their ions down here. All right, so step 2 is kind of the same as what we've been doing before. So we're going to add up each element's charge until they combine to 0. So what I mean by that is whatever the charge of Cr is, whatever number this is, right? I can add more Crs and or Fs, but basically the charges of both of these need to be the same number, but this one's going to be positive and this one's going to be negative so that they add up to 0. Notice that F is a smaller number, it's 1 minus, so if I add one more F, I'm going to get the number 2, right? So here, F 1 minus, -1 plus -1 is going to be 2 minus, and here I have Cr at 2 plus, right? So if I just added one more F, now these charges are the exact opposite of each other and they're going to add up to 0. So in step number 3, the molecular formula will be the number of each elements used to get the charges to combine to 0. So on here, so I used 1 Cr, so it's going to be Cr. I don't need to write the number 1 if there's just one of them, right? And here I use 2 Fs to get the charges to add up to 0. So it's going to be F2, right? This will be my final answer. Okay, so now what if I have to do the opposite? So how do I find the name given the molecular formula of the transition metals? Now I have the formula, but I'm trying to find the name, right? So my first step, this one's a little bit trickier, is to identify the charge of the ion that's not a transitional metal, right? So if I look up Fe on the periodic table, right, and if I scan across looking for Fe, I'm going to notice that Fe is right here. It's in my box where the transition metals are, and there's no charge. So I don't know the charge of Fe. Just know that it's Fe, the charge is something, right? And I also know if I look up Cl, if you remember doing your previous homework, right, we do know the charge of Cl, where if I check the periodic table, scanning across, Cl is here, and its charge is 1 minus. Right, so the charge of Cl is going to be 1 minus. So I don't know the charge of Fe, that's my transitional metal, but I found the charge of Cl, which is 1 minus. Right, and then next, I'm going to write out the number of each ion you have and the charges of the ions you know. Right, so notice here, I have 1 Fe and I have two Cl's because it says Cl2. So I know I have two of these, but I only have one of these Fe's. Right? So I'm going to draw Fe once, Cl twice with its charge. Right? Now I'm going to use the rule of zero charge to identify and work backwards a little bit what has to be the charge of Fe. So this is a little bit trickier, right? So Cl added together gives me a charge of 2 minus. So if I don't know what this is, I know what number this has to be, right? In order for it to add up to 0, right? It has to be the same number, but the opposite, right? So I know that this has to be 2 plus. And since there's only one of them, this number has to be 2 plus, right? Because they always need to be the same numerical value, just the opposite. Right? So now that I figured out that Fe is 2 plus, I can find the names of Fe and Cl and then write them down, right? So just like before, so finding the name of each ion, Fe, what was Fe called? It's called iron. So I'm going to label it iron. What is the charge of Fe? Fe's charge is 2. So I'm going to write Roman numeral 2. So that means Fe has a charge of 2 plus, like we figured out here. Right? Cl, what's the name of Cl? Cl is chlorine according to my periodic table. So here, oops, wrong color. Instead of chlorine, just like before, I'm going to drop the last syllable, right? So normally it's chlorine, but remember to show that iron and chlorine are a couple, they're bonded together, I need to drop the ene and change it to ide. So iron 2 chloride is my formula. Right, so this one's a little bit trickier because you need to find the charges of the non-transitional metal, and then you have to think to yourself, working backwards, what number of this charge would that be? And that would be the Roman numeral number. And then you have to go back and look at the names and add back the names. Right. So since this is a little bit trickier, if you do need help on this, remember that I re-go over this stuff on Tuesdays or the next day, whichever the next day is. And you can always ask me for help in the chat. So at this point, you should be able to do the questions at the end of this video. I would definitely slow this video down or re-watch it again. If you get stuck at all, or ask me for help in Zoom class in the chat box, or email me at qquan@slusd.us.